All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome
Hello.
to this episode of the Healthcare AI podcast. For those of you who are joining us from our previous podcast, Gradient Descent, uh, welcome back. We've taken a little bit of a break after, Voice Cube merged with Jon Snow. So now we're part of the Healthcare AI podcast that Jon Snow's been running. So welcome if you're from the Healthcare AI podcast and Jon Snow, or and also to our older audiences from Getting Descent. It's my name is Vishnu, and I have here with me my colleague Alex as well, who's principal
Hello.
data scientist at Jon Snow Labs now. So, hey Alex, how are you doing?
All right. Yeah. Sort of. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
So today we have an interesting topic. This is a pretty hot topic around the whole agentic AI LLM landscape. We're going to be talking about MCP, right?
Yes. Model context
So
protocol.
model context protocol. That's right. So what is it? Like for those of you, so people who have never sort of heard about it, what's like the 30-second elevator pitch for MCP?
Yeah. So it's a framework from built by the people at Anthropic. It is sort of like the purpose of it is to give a common language, a common interface to resources and tools for LLM based applications. Um, So out there, like we're familiar with a lot of other well-known frameworks like Llama Index, LangChain, etc. Those are more about structuring the LLM use within your project. MCP is more about creating common ways of accessing the resources that agentic AI uses. Um, like some of the things it comes with, like it comes with its own server, so that you can implement it and then launch it. You won't need to bring in some other framework to implement it, like a fast API or what have you. Um, it also integrates with the Claude Desktop app. Um, they have a bunch of different SDKs in different languages. I think it's 9 right now. We're just gonna be interested in in Python, but like if you do Go or TypeScript, that's available. Um, uh, yeah, and towards what you said, there's a lot of talk about it. I would say from most of the conversations I've had with people about it, it seems like at this point it is mostly talk. There's
Mm.
people are interested in doing it, but I don't know. There's a few well-known companies like Stripe that they have it in production, um, but I don't know necessarily how common it is in production at this point.
Yeah. So just so I understand, so MCP is this is open standard that Anthropic put out that, and the goal is to sort of enable developers to sort of build these secure connections between like data sources and like AI powered tools, right? That's the
Yes.
goal for MCP itself. And the way you go about doing that is you sort of build these MCP servers on top of your data sources, right? And so if you have a data source
Yes.
that you want to expose, you want to make it easy for AI tools to sort of use it in these agentic exchanges and workflows. You sort of build an MCP server in front of the data source and allow these clients, AI applications, to connect to them securely, and then query the data or even write back stuff, and basically do everything that you normally do with the data source,
Yeah.
but through this sort of additional layer on top of your existing data source APIs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, like if you think of like if you're making a tool available in LangChain,
Mm-hmm.
usually you have like some sort of implementation of it. So you have some function that enters into that use case. So like you brought up the example of writing it into a database. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
you have something in your application where you want people to be able to like save let's say save a chat log to a particular database, and you want
Mm-hmm.
the user to be able to initiate that. So you do it in LangChain is that you would implement sort of like the top level function that like takes that will take the chat log and send it off to be saved in the database. And then when you add it to your application, there's going to be like some sort of string that you give it so that the LLM has a description of what that function is, and you add it as a tool in your calls. Well, MCP sort of does a lot of that boilerplate of organizing tools for you. So you would basically take that top level function, you would decorate it for your server, um, and then it would just be something that's available in your API. You don't need to do any of the other sort of like wiring of supporting different calls. Um, and they have a lot of templates for these different access methods. So whether it's to a database or files, there's a lot of templates out there so that you don't necessarily have to, re-implement your own, Redis connection. Um,
Gotcha. And I know we're in the healthcare AI podcast now. So how
yeah,
does this relate to healthcare at all? Or is there a healthcare version of this, or how does that work?
yeah. So Innovaccer, which is sort of like a healthcare AI company, they've been building, and then they've released their own healthcare MCP.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just focused on building specific tools and parts of the framework that are healthcare related. Um, I think anyone here who's like worked in with healthcare data is like, for example, we have, that there could be a lot of custom data structures and data stores that people have, whether it's around security concerns or whether it's around government regulated, data structures, what have you. Um, there's a lot of custom work that needs to be there, and this HMCP is looking to support that kind of work. Um,
Gotcha.
uh,
Okay.
um,
Well, so okay. So I think for today's episode, look, you do have
yeah,
you've done some work, and we actually are going to walk through an example use case for
yeah,
an MCP, and then also see some live code in action. Is that right?
yes,
All right.
yeah. So, like I said, I think a lot of people are talking about it, and then so a lot of people are learning it right now. So essentially, I've done like a hello world level example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so basically, I just wanted to have a resource, I wanted to have a prompt, and I wanted to have a tool. So I have it set up to run through the Claude Desktop app, but let's walk through the code real quick.
And so before you get started, so
Yeah,
maybe just briefly explain what those things are for people who are not familiar with those resources, prompts, and tools. They have specific meanings in this sort of agentic AI
yeah.
world, right? So.
So resources are basically the data and the access to data. So in my case, it's just going to be a text file, but you
Mm-hmm.
can have access to a database, to a search index, to a vector database. Prompts are like essentially like if you're
Okay.
using LLMs, you
Prompts,
know what
yeah.
that is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way for you to have templated prompts so that
Mm-hmm.
you can easily then use, let's say, so in this case, from the desktop app, I can instantiate a prompt without having to write out the full step, and it will know how to like fill in any of the parameters of your prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, tools are sort of what makes agentic thing agentic. In this case, my tool is just going to be a function that takes some data that's extracted from an article. So we're going to have an article, actually the paper we wrote for Pythia, Seeing Through the Fog. It's going to extract a bunch of data from it, and then convert that to n triples. And we'll talk about a little what n triples are. Actually, yeah, I think that's probably a good time to do it. So n triples are when you're using RDF graphs, which is something we've done a lot of. Um, there's a subject, a predicate, and an object representing a relationship. Now, this relationship could be between two entities in your graph. So, like, um, paper A references paper B, or it
Mm-hmm.
could be to a property. So, for example, this entity is named Alex Thomas, um, and that would be referring to me. Um, so,
Okay.
uh, basically, I'm going to take this data that I'm going to extract using a prompt, and this is what
Mm-hmm.
this tool is going to do. Is you'll then call that on the analysis result, and it'll convert it to an n triples file. So let's walk through the
So
code.
wait, so what's the MCP server itself going to return in this case? Is it going to return just the paper or the entropy version of the paper?
So it will return. So what it's going to do in the desktop is it'll create an artifact, and that's basically the equivalent of it returning the text content of an N triples file. The first call is actually going to return the extracted data from the paper. So we provide it with the paper. That's going to be a
Okay.
resource that supplies a URL, and that's going to
Yeah.
reference to something that we have. So it's going to say, okay, I have this URL now. I'm going to pull the text from that URL and extract data. And it'll return that extracted data. And then we're going to say, this data you just extracted, run it through the converter to N triples, and then it's going to return us the N triples.
Okay. Or maybe this might be clearer once you start showing us the
Yeah.
whole orchestration flow. Um, all right, take it away.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, you might have to zoom
Yeah.
in. Like you need an AI interface for zooming in. Is what we need.
Okay. It starts to zoom here on its own.
Oh,
Let's go to 150. Okay. Okay.
okay.
It seems to be stable now.
Okay.
So first, yeah, I'm creating a server. A lot of the examples out there are using what's called a fast MCP server, which is you sort of
Mm-hmm.
just like launch it locally on your own. I wanted to show
Mm-hmm.
like the integration with the desktop app,
Mm-hmm.
as I think that for a lot of people that are building more like lightweight applications, integrating with a desktop app is probably a good idea. But if you're building like a more significant product, then you probably will, not so much care about the integration with that app, with the desktop app. Okay, so I defined some prefixes. If you've ever worked with RDF stuff before, you'll probably recognize a lot of these.
Mm-hmm.
This will just make it a little bit cleaner to refer to what we're building in the code. So the prompt I'm going to use is one which is just going to take the document resource name, and it's going to extract these things from it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and format it as a JSON. So pretty straightforward one. Here is the prompt object that the MCP wants you to create. So we have that document and we have a description, the name of the document source. Yeah, so there's a description of the prompt argument here. Um, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the resources.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one function here which is like list resources, and that's will basically go and say, okay, what are all the resources we have access to?
Mm-hmm.
This lets us read the content from one. So basically, when you select a resource, so in my case, the documents that we're getting, I'm returning URIs for everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's what getDocs is doing. It's just returning resources, which is an MCP object. This is going to refer to the location of all the files. In this case, we just have one file. And then when it wants to actually access it, it will read the text from the file and use that. So, and we also have
So
the thing here to
when does
list.
it actually analyze it? I guess go back to your analysis prompt. Oh, so this just
Yes.
it seems like a simple CRUD like operation,
Yeah.
but in the analysis prompt is where you're trying to extract out the intervals. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. So
Okay.
essentially, what it's going to do is that it's going to supply supply this name, this reference to the resource, and then
Mm-hmm.
use that in the prompt. Use the content of this resource.
Okay.
Um,
And then which call will return the result of the analysis as opposed to just the raw data? Is there like a call where it runs the analysis on the data?
so here's the part where we have the prompts. We have list prompts, and we also have get prompt, which will get it. And when you supply it with an argument, it has this resource name. It'll fill it out,
I
and
see.
then you'll have this filled out prompt, and you can just execute it and get the results. So
And
that's what this
but okay,
get
but the
prompt.
client will have to call this function get prompt with
Yes,
an argument.
yes.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and then we have the list of the tools, and here we have sort of like the input schema. This is basically what is going to be output from the extraction above.
Okay.
Um, and then the tool that we're going to have to call is the part where we get those results and we build the N triples. And this is just sort of like a lot of going through the different results and building up these triplet tuples, or rather these specific triplet like
What tool
strings.
are you calling here? Like the tool is just
This
the
function,
tool.
yeah,
Okay.
this so basically what's inside here is just a big
Mm,
block of code that's going to be treated as a tool.
I see.
Um, and then we have the main one that launches it. So,
And then this piece of code itself that you're working through, where will this actually execute? In the desktop client, or where is this actually going to execute?
so when you make something available to the desktop, so there's basically a file that you go and add a JSON blob
Mm-hmm.
to,
Mm-hmm.
not blob, JSON object. It will then use that to start up the server. So you'll give the location to the file and the command necessary to start it up. It'll
Mm-hmm.
start up the server, and then because you're decorating your functions like this, it will know the functions to call. It'll say, okay, I know how to list the resources, the prompts, the tools, and when you go to execute, when it wants to execute a tool, so you put in something into the app, and the LLM determines it needs to execute this tool. It will then basically come here and go, okay, I'm going to call this. I need to call this tool. I'm going to call it with analysis to time troubles.
Gotcha. So yeah, that's the part that is a little unclear to me. What is the difference between the desktop client and the server, and the interaction between the two? So the desktop client in this, and maybe you'll show this in action, and that should clarify this. But yeah, okay,
So let's go through and walk through what it looks like. Okay.
yeah,
So I'm going to go ahead and add a resource from document study. So I'm going to add seeing through the fog. So that's the paper road for Pythia. Now, so I've added that. So now I want to add also the prompt to analyze it. You see the
yeah.
Claude thing?
Yes,
Okay. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go add from doc study. And this will get the text document.
so this is the Cloud Desktop app.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and execute with just the text there. Um, it'll run some. It'll look at this text. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's running some stuff automatically. Um, so here it's extracted the stuff using the prompt. It's sort of figured out to use
So
the
did
prompt.
you include the prompt as well when you uploaded the
Uh,
text?
I didn't have to. It figured out how to do it. So it must have called, listed the prompts, found the one prompt that was there, ran
Huh.
this resource through it,
Huh.
and returned the results.
And so the MCP server is already running now.
Yes. When
Okay. So the
when you
MCP
list
server
it
that we
in
took. Okay.
yes. So when you list it in the desktop app, the
Yeah,
desktop
we
app
didn't see
application.
that part. I don't think we saw how you listed it and everything. But so yeah. Okay.
Uh, so yeah, I can go ahead and show that too. So, wow, it's doing a lot of like analysis of the document.
Hmm.
Um, so let's see where.
Anyway, let it run through.
I don't remember the exact location of it, but I can. I'll share the GitHub repo of this project after this, and
Okay.
I'll include a copy of the config file that you would want for this.
Okay. Yeah, that'll
Um,
be helpful. Yeah. So this is some config file you have to do to the desktop client, Cloud Desktop client,
yes,
to sort of
you list the
let it
location
know
of the file. Yeah.
there's new MCP server that you're registering it with Claude, and then Claude would be like, okay, I'm going to go spin up this MCP server, and then the code for it, and then also the prompts that are included in it, and so it'll spin that MCP server, and whenever you start interacting with Claude through its regular interface, it will then try to use this new MCP server and the tool that you just registered with it as part of its regular interactions.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So it used the prompt and extracted all these resources. That's
Mm.
uh, uh, the the stuff for the triples.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask it. So let's see. Um, so it looks like So let's see. I'm actually going to add the analysis prompt just to see how that's going to go. Let's see, add doc study, analyze document.
Mm.
Okay, so let's see what it does. It should just recreate this result probably, but so I'll show it explicitly using the prompt. And
Mm-hmm.
it'll create an artifact here that we can see.
Mm.
So yeah, it found the three authors. It determined keywords. Extracting the references now. So this will take a few moments. Um, yeah, extracting the abstract, topics, entities mentioned, and now it's extracting the relationships. So um, uh, the relationships are sort of like almost they're kind of already in a triples format, but a lot of these other ones aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it's done with creating the artifact. So as soon as it's done, okay, there we go. Please convert the document analysis into n triples, and that should trigger it to use the tool. So the analysis would have it essentially returned to us this JSON object, and now it's going to use
Mm.
this data as
Mm.
input to the tool.
Gotcha. There's
Okay.
already subject predicate object. It's a triple
Yes, for the
representation,
relationships.
but
Yeah,
okay, for the
but it's
relationships,
also going to handle it for the entities, the
for
topics.
the other
It'll handle
entities,
it
and then add the schema and like the
exactly.
okay.
So we have a new artifact being made.
There we go. Okay,
So
now I see
yeah,
the triples. Okay.
let's see, abstract. It's
Very
creating
nice.
all the keyword ones, and yeah, it's going to go here and like continue to like spit out the n triples. Um, and yeah, this is obviously a super simple example. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I plan on like continue to build out like an example project with MCP, and maybe we'll revisit again in a future episode a more significant MCP example. Um, but
And
yeah,
just to bring it home to the healthcare context, I guess you could be querying an EMR system or like a different API, that a Fire API, or anything else from healthcare context as well through
yeah,
this sort of MCP protocol, right? So.
yeah. So for example, maybe like you have like a very large inpatient document, and you want to extract sort of like the important bullet points. You could have like a summary tool in here where you say like, okay, get me this resource, and then, like you query for this patient's like most recent inpatient visit, and they say, okay, summarize it, and then it can like spit out the summary for you.
Right,
And it would
right,
be a really easy way of letting like a healthcare provider be able to do something that's pretty advanced without having to think about like how it's being done behind the scenes.
right, right. No, this is pretty powerful. I guess it makes it easier for these AI tools to sort of start interacting directly with these existing data sources,
Yes.
but through this sort of natural language like protocols,
Yeah.
with an additional analysis layer added on top. Now, I do have to mention this is a pretty early protocol. There's like there are some security concerns around this. I know there's work being done to sort of secure these sort of raw MCP servers, to prevent them from prompt injection attacks and things like that. We'll add some early work that people are starting to do around this as well. But it is a very promising way to sort of get the AI tools
Yeah.
start interacting with these existing data sources and enabling them in this new tool set and making more
Yeah. And I
agentic.
would say,
So, mhm.
as far as my review of it as a framework, I think it's clearly very powerful. My two criticisms are, you know, uh, I'm not entirely sure, like having it contain like the server code, like why they would want to do that. And I guess like maybe they have some inner workings that they have to connect the different methods that they use there. Um, but it does seem like it's doing multiple things, which is always a more difficult thing for a framework to do. The other thing is a lot of the documentation when you're like going to Anthropic to learn how to use it is built around their desktop app,
Mhm.
which you know I think that there will be some people who are building smaller applications who want to use it through the desktop app, but probably the majority of users are going to want to just launch their own server and access it through their own UIs or any other way that they're
Right.
using
Right.
their API.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like you said, it's
Absolutely.
early days. So like, I'm sure the documentation will evolve to match like sort of the normal use cases as time goes on. But also another thing is like this is not a MCP versus LangChain or LangGraph. You can actually use them together. I think right now, if MCP is not being used a lot, MCP plus other frameworks is also not being used a lot. So there's not a lot of examples out there. I know that I found a project about using it with where it's like wrapped where they're trying to wrap it for use with LangChain.
Hmm.
Um, but this is not like an either and like the frameworks you use for organizing the agentic workflow. That's not really what MCP is trying to do. MCP is not trying to necessarily conquer that space. They're trying to handle the sort of the deployment, the services that make agentic workflows available.
Yeah.
That seems to be the thing that they're trying to do the most at.
Yeah. I think that this is more of an the standard for communication protocols between your tooling and your data source
Yeah,
layer than just an orchestration, right? I think the land graph and things like that, they're more interested in orchestration and how to do
yep,
orchestration and make that declarative and things like that. Whereas this one is more about like, okay, once you have the orchestration layer figured out using land graph, then how do you sort of standardize on the how the LLM is going to invoke the tooling, find different tools, maybe even
yep,
dynamically, and use them in the whatever graph you're building, or whatever agentic graph that you're actually trying to build for your use case, right? So
yeah,
no, I think it's interesting. I'm curious, where our listeners and our viewers, if they're starting to use MCP or looking into it, and what kinds of use cases they're actually thinking of using in healthcare or otherwise. So, if you are starting to look at it, please add your comments in terms of like what are the use
yeah.
cases that you think you're considering. So that'll be something interesting that maybe we can do a follow up on in a future episode. But thank you, Alex. This is great. I feel like I've learned a lot more just walking through your example, and thanks for putting this together. At a high level idea of what MCP is, but now I feel like I have a much better grasp of the some of the details around how all of this comes together. So
Sometimes you just need a
yeah,
hello world.
that's right. This is the only
Yeah,
way to learn, right? Is just looking
yes.
at a hello world example and see how the whole thing comes together. Well, anything else you want to say before we
Uh,
close this episode out? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've talked about is like we do plan on covering more of these frameworks in the future.
Yeah.
So we'll be like we covered DSPy in previous ones. I think there's other ones out there. I've been working a little bit recently with the Pydantic AI, the Pydantic
Hmm.
agentic framework, where they're trying to
Hmm.
go from just like the defining the data structures to actually doing a lot of other things. They have some cool additions in there. Like they have something that's supposed to allow for LLM evaluations, where it's just like a structure where you can define a data set and just run it and get a result. Um, yeah, so I think there's some pretty cool ones coming out there. Another one actually I want to get into is OpenAI is released their sort of like their own sort of preferred agentic framework.
Oh yeah.
I think that yeah,
So that should be
that wouldn't be
interesting. By the way,
interesting.
the viewers and listeners, please drop us a note if there's other topics and tools that you
Yes.
would like us to talk about in more detail that you're starting to hear about in the healthcare space or outside. So we'd love to sort of go deep on those topics as well. So with that, I'd like to sort of wrap up today's episode.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you've actually, listened all the way to this point, and hopefully, see you next time. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.